It's good to laugh. It's good to laugh. It's good to laugh. It's good to laugh. Thank you.
Come on, folks. This spiritual stuff is serious business now. That's oh. Oscar Wilde once said, "Life is too important to be taken seriously." And I had a minister friend who used to say, "Yes, it needs to be taken joyously." So thank you for joining in the joy of this. We've been studying and learning about being the light of the world. We've been called to be the light of the world. And I look out and I see the light of the world. I see beautiful lights here. And we all have that light within us of the Spirit of the Divine. We are being called by the Christ Spirit within to really let that light shine. And we do that in many ways, in varying ways, in ways that are unique and special to each and every one of us, which is really one of the magnificent aspects of our divine nature, is really allowing that unique individuality of us to shine through. And it shines through as different qualities and characteristics that we all have and that we're all learning from and growing into. And it is a way of helping us to really formulate an understanding of the ways that the spiritual light works through us. And one of the great teachings of unity is from our co-founder, Charles Fillmore, who wrote a magnificent book called The 12 Powers of Man. This includes, man is generic, so it does include, we haven't updated the language yet, we're working on it, but it is humankind, the 12 powers of each and every human person. We have these amazing spiritual gifts that are represented by the 12 disciples, and they're represented by the 12 tribes of Israel in our scriptures. And so they are representative and symbolic of different spiritual energies and qualities that are inherent in each and every one of us. And we all have those. And part of our work is to learn to develop those in ways that really allow us to be that light of the world that Jesus was talking about, in ways that perhaps we have not been, that we've perhaps hidden in some ways. And so as I was thinking about this, we've been working with the power of faith, and we've been working with and looking at and exploring the power of understanding. And we've also been exploring the power of will, which is our ability to choose. And all of these powers do work together. And one of the most important, one of the most significant ones, I feel, and Charles Fillmore said this as well, that it is one of the most significant ones. It is the power of imagination. Imagine that. Imagination. It's one of my favorite, of course, and as I oftentimes say, it's the greatest nation on earth. I love the imagination. So I was really reflecting on, meditating this week on the idea of imagination. I came across this wonderful story. A man says, I work at home, so my 4-year-old twin daughters, Maggie and Katie, are used to seeing me operate a computer and a fax machine. And so one afternoon, I was watching them have fun on our outdoor play set with a small slide. And Maggie proceeded to go down head first, giggling that she was faxing herself. And was even more delighted to see her outdone by Katie, who stood at the top of the slide and shouted, "Here comes page 2." Imagination, I think, is one of our greatest gifts, and it does really allow for us to really participate in the creative process in ways that we really perhaps don't always consciously do, but we can do this in a way that can be very conscious. And interestingly enough, we're actually doing it whether we're conscious of it or not. We are continually in the energy of imagination. Do you realize that? And the powerful thing about that is that we always have different images that go on in our mind all the time. And sometimes they seem very visual-like images, or sometimes they're just, they involve different senses. And it's really one of the things when we learn to train our imagination to really incorporate all of our different senses. Wonderful Mark Twain once said, "When I was younger, I could remember anything, whether it happened or not." And many times when we're working with our imagination, we're actually pulling back memories. And so part of the work of imagination is to learn to tap into that inner insight within us, that spirit within, to be able to allow ourselves to let the imaging and the imagining of the higher mind, of spirit, of the one mind to come through. And not so much be steeped in all the things that we have imagined from our past. Oftentimes we get stuck in imagining the future as being reflective of our past. And this is where we get stuck in a lot of cycles in life that are not necessarily supportive of us and don't really necessarily bring us into the fullness of our possibilities to be that light of the world. Now, there are wonderful things from our past that we can pull forward, and they can help stimulate us in that way and move us in a way that is bringing a higher energy and a higher light. And that's the value of that. And one of the things we want to be conscious of and aware of is that sometimes the memories that we hold on to are not necessarily the ones that we want to bring into the future. Wouldn't you agree? And so we're going to talk a little bit about this understanding of imagination, how that works. We've been also working with a wonderful book from our neighbor down south here in San Antonio, Linda Martella-Whitsitt, who wrote this really great book on these different qualities and our ability and our calling to be the light of the world. The name of her book is Divine Audacity. I just love the name of it. It really kind of speaks to me about really putting yourself out there and being that light of the world and being open to that as a possibility in your life. In Philippians chapter 4, verse 8, it says, "Finally, beloved, whatsoever is true, whatsoever is honorable, whatsoever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellent, if there is anything worthy of praise, think on these things." We want to really put our energy into imagining all of those things that really are true, that are valuable, that are honorable, that are just. And when we do that, we're actually a part of the creative process, not only in our lives, but we're also part of the creative process in our world. And we do help to shape and form a world that is more reflective of the spiritual light and truth of the one presence and one power that is everywhere, in all things, through all things. James Dillett Freeman, the wonderful poet laureate of Unity, wrote a wonderful little poem called Imagination, and here's an excerpt from it. He says, "Imagination is the act or power of forming a mental image of something not present to the senses or never before wholly perceived in reality. A power that frees us from the limitations of our senses, the power of conception." So imagination is this powerful capacity to picture what can be and holding that idea and developing it until we feel its effects while it is yet still unmanifest. And to live into that idea until it is essentially becomes a reality in our experiences. In a sense, imagination is not our primary power. Let me back up. Linda is actually saying something different than I just said. She's saying, in a sense, imagination is our primary power because it is essential for this cultivation of all our magnificent spiritual qualities. So in order to really develop these spiritual qualities, we actually have to be willing and able and participating in imagining ourselves having these spiritual qualities. So if you've ever had the prayer, "God, give me faith," start imagining that you have that faith. Start seeing yourself as someone who's having faith. Start seeing yourself as someone who has understanding. Start imagining and envisioning yourself as someone who is easily able to choose something greater and more and higher. And as you use those spiritual qualities of imagination and seeing not only the image, but also just all of the impressions of who and what you can be, you will begin to develop and grow in that way, in that manifestation. And so the imagination is really a huge piece of our ability to form from the invisible into the visible. It brings things into form. You know, imagination is one of the things that, you know, it's so obvious that we come into the world with that, I think, and we really began to develop it around the age of 2 or 3. And I can remember, I was a pretty imaginative kid. I don't know if you guys can imagine that or not, but I was pretty imaginative. My younger sister and I used to play together all the time, and one of the things that we used to love to play was Mary and Johnny. Now, you guys haven't met Mary and Johnny yet. But Mary and Johnny are these amazing young kids that have these amazing possibilities and powers. We played Mary and Johnny all the time. It was our favorite game to play. And I can remember my younger sister coming to me and saying, Tony, let's go play Mary and Johnny. And the beautiful thing about Mary and Johnny is they could do anything. They could do anything. Man, they were super powered, and they could fly, and they could, you know, they could live underwater, and oh man, they lived in the sky on the clouds. They could do anything. And it was a wonderful time. It was a wonderful experience, and it's still a very vivid memory in my life. And one of the things that I really love about that is, you know, it really is an affirmation of our possibilities. Even as children, if we begin to really see ourselves in the possible, begin to play in that way. Now, we tend to forget that, unfortunately, as adults. It's one of the gifts that we have that we sometimes think, oh, it's just your imagination. Well, folks, I got news for you. There's something more than this idea of just your imagination, because imagination is one of the things that really does shape and form our experiences out here in the world. Now, it may not always look exactly as we imagine it, but I can tell you it usually often comes very close to it. I can remember having an experience, and I think I've shared this with you before. I don't recall whether I have or not, but I was actually riding in the back seat of my car when I was a kid, probably about 5 or 6 is what I recall. And I was kind of in that little dreamlike state, you know, kind of half in and out. It was a nice, hot, warm summer day, and it was the windows were down, and I remember the breeze kind of blowing in. It was still kind of warm, and I was kind of half awake and half asleep, you might say. And I remember thinking there was a toy that I really wanted to get for myself, and I needed about $5 to be able to get that toy. And I remember having this image in my head of seeing, in my family, if you found money, you know, loser, you know, if you found something that was, you got to keep it, you know, to the most part, not always, but to the most part. If you found something like that, then you got to keep it. So I imagined and saw, and I mean, I saw it very clearly. I saw a $5 bill laying in the grass. And I had this real sense that this $5 bill was laying in the grass, and I even had a picture of the building that it was laying in. And I really had never seen or had this vision before, but I really thought, wow, that's really great. And so I just kind of released it and let it go. And I kid you not, we came around the corner, and there was that building. And I remembered it actually was the Southwestern Bell building in my little hometown. And I looked out there, and there was something green out in the grass. And I went, Dad, stop. There's a $5 bill laying in the grass out there. Now, a $5 bill back when I was a kid that's big bucks, I'm telling you. Not only for a kid, but that was a big bucks for adults at that time. And so, you know, my dad says, oh, no, that's just a piece of, he says, that's just a piece of paper or something. I said, no, Dad, really, seriously, stop. So he said, all right. So I stopped, and sure enough, I jumped out, and I ran over there, and there was a $5 bill laying in the grass. No way. Kid you not. There was a $5 bill. I went and picked it up, was able to go buy my toy. Boy, I'm telling you, I celebrated. And I was puzzled about that. Many years later, I went to see a psychic one time when I was in my 20s, I guess, and I asked her about that experience. And the question I have is, did I just imagine that and then bring that into my experience? Or did I see that it was already there? And she said, yes. That is the truth. See, that is the power of imagination. See, your power of imagination actually does bring into manifestation what already is. And when you can conceive it and you can believe it, I know you've heard this before, you can achieve it. When you can see it and you can believe it, you can achieve it. And so a big part of our use of the imagination is learning that practice of being able to conceive it and to believe it and to achieve it. Well, this, I have to say, I feel like in some ways I'm kind of preaching to the choir in this group because I know you know it. This group has actually done some wonderful work in being able to bring into our experiences wonderful things in our lives. And so, but it's just always a good reminder of being conscious of working with our imagination in such a way that we're creating and producing those things that will bring us into a greater experience of our good and our well-being. Neville Goddard says, our ability to imagine is paramount. It is of such prime importance that 20th century metaphysical author Neville Goddard regarded Jesus Christ as the exemplification of the power of imagination. In Goddard's view, imagination is our redeeming ability. Our power of imagination, with our power of imagination, we can revise our past experiences as well as create an ideal future. We can imagine ourselves into our true nature and assert our greatest spiritual capacities. And Charles Fillmore says, the highest and best work of the imagination is the marvelous transformation that it works in character. Imagine that you are one with the principle of good, and you will become truly good. To imagine oneself perfect fixes the idea of perfection in the invisible mind substance. And the mind forces at once begin the work of bringing forth perfection. Now, I have to say that I wrestle a little bit with this idea of perfection. I really think a lot of times we have kind of set that word up in a way that really doesn't serve us as well. And so I really, many times, there's a scripture that says, be ye perfect, even as your heavenly Father is perfect. I think that's a mistranslation. I've looked up the word that was translated as perfect, and what it really means is be whole, even as your heavenly Father is whole. Reality is we're already whole. We're already perfect. And part of our work in being able to experience that out here in the world is to practice being whole. That is true not only in a physical sense, but it is important to do that in a physical sense. But it's true in terms of our relationships. It's true in terms of our finances. A part of our work is to see ourselves in the kind of experience and relationship that we want to be in. And if you see yourself in that way, looking beyond the appearances, because we have a tendency to really get stuck in appearances a lot, looking beyond appearances, seeing ourselves in a place of being in a connection in relationship at the level and the way that we want to be. And one of the things that Linda points out is that when we find ourselves wanting and desiring to be in that kind of relationship, a big part of our work is to imagine and see ourselves as the person who can be in that kind of relationship. You follow what I'm saying? We have a wonderful little saying that Julie wrote on our board, and I keep getting reminded of it, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it basically is from Abraham Hicks' work. And it basically says that, see if I can draw it back. If you are out of vibrational alignment with a solution to the problem, no amount of action will draw you into that solution. And so part of our work in moving into vibrational alignment with what it is that we desire and want to experience in the fullness of our lives is to be able to imagine ourselves already in that place. In Unity, we don't use the word vibrational alignment as much as we do consciousness, but it's the same thing. When we are out of the consciousness of experiencing health, nothing that we do out here is really going to produce health. If we're out of vibrational alignment with abundance, nothing that we do out here is going to create the experience and manifestation of abundance. And so a big piece of our work is to align ourselves, and our imagination is one of the best and most important and valuable tools to help us to move into that vibrational alignment, to move us into the consciousness. To experience having, we need to see ourselves as having. Does that make sense? So the highest and best work of imagination is also transforming those character qualities within us and seeing us having those qualities. And so one of the things that Linda Martellett-Whitsett says is imagination is our power of conception, vision, and embodiment. I like those three terms that really describe the use of our imagination. Ralph Waldo Emerson says, imagination is not a talent of some, but is the health of everyone. And so any constructive ideas that you or I could conceive of comes from the one mind. We are all a part of one mind, which is the mind of the divine. And the one mind, the first three words in our English language in the Bible reveal this truth that in the beginning God, and in the beginning God, good is the beginning, the origin of every vision, of every hope, of every dream, in the beginning, one mind. This is from Linda. I think it was very well said. And so there's an understanding that when we are in the energy and the process of praying, a big part of our work is to align our energy and our thoughts and our feelings with that which we are praying for. Not as, how shall I put it? Greg Braden has a great way of kind of describing this. He has a great story, and I can't remember which book it was in, but he has a great story about having a friend, a Native American friend, who invited him. They were having a drought out, I believe, in Arizona. They were having a drought in Arizona, and as he was visiting with his friend, he said, would you like to go with me to one of our sacred sites to pray rain? And he said, well, yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to do that. And so they went out to this sacred site, way out in the beautiful desert out there, and the drought had been going on for a while. And so his friend went out there and kind of drew a circle and stood in this circle and just stood there for a moment. I think he said he raised his hands to the sky, something like that. And then he said, okay, let's go. And he said, what? Wait a minute, I thought you were here to pray for rain. He said, no, I didn't say pray for rain. I said pray rain. If I pray for rain, it'll never come. What I do is I see myself soaked. I see myself drenched in the rain. I see myself experiencing the rain. I see myself feeling the drops hitting me. I engage all of my senses, basically, in seeing this as though it's so already. And when I've done that, it's time to go. Abraham Hicks says 17 seconds is all it takes. If we will hold an image, a vision of something for 17 seconds, it will already be on its way to you. That's all it takes, 17 seconds. He said that the 17 seconds can equate to a year of praying for something. And so part of our work is not just to pray for that which we want to experience in our lives, but to be in the energy of that which we are praying. I like that awareness, and it really is a powerful awareness. I've experienced it a number of times. I'm going to suggest to you that there's a group of us that just experienced it recently with our wonderful demonstration of abundance and prosperity in our lives. But interestingly enough, we were also experiencing it when we weren't experiencing that abundance in our lives. It's important to recognize that we are experiencing the results of our imagination all the time. And so if we are experiencing something that is not really reflective of our possibilities and potential, we are misusing our imagination. I've heard a saying from someone, I don't remember where I got this, but worry is the misuse of imagination. Now, I don't know anybody here that's ever done that, of course, but but we have been trained in some ways to do that. We have been trained in some ways to misuse our imagination. And in some ways, it's somewhat, evolutionary. We were, I think, conditioned and trained early on to make sure that we were on guard against any of the tigers that are hiding behind the bushes out there. Wouldn't you agree? I think it's part of our evolutionary process, and it is there to try and protect us from physical harm. But one of the things that we need to begin to recognize is that we can shift that awareness and that energy. And it's valuable for us to really recognize that always being on guard against the tigers in this world is not necessarily something that we really need anymore. And yet we have a tendency to see a lot of tigers around. And the more we see tigers, the interesting thing is tigers love it when you recognize them. Do you realize that? And they call all their buddies and friends. And they'll hang out all around in all the bushes everywhere, won't they? And this is how we misuse our imagination. We see not necessarily what we want to experience in the world. We see not necessarily the presence of the divine. We see not necessarily the peace that we are praying for or the rain that we're praying for. We're seeing ourselves oftentimes from those experiences, often from our past, and we project those into the possibilities of the future. And so a wonderful work of the imagination is also to be able to re-envision our past. And I think it's one of the most healing things that we can do for ourselves, and not only ourselves, but our world. Our past still brings up images. Do you realize that? We see so much of our cognitive work is done in images, and I don't mean necessarily just images per se, and yet we may not always be conscious of the images and the imagination that we're using. Let me give you a little example. Take a moment now and just in your mind, tell me where your car is that you came in, or your vehicle that you came in. Now, if it's a bus, maybe it's going down the street, and that's okay, but you just tell me, how many of you had an image of your vehicle at that moment? When I asked that, I think almost everyone did. Is anyone that didn't, you actually had a sense of where it was, I would bet, whether you had an image of it or not. And so that is our imagination, interestingly enough. We would not even be able to find our cars if we didn't really have an imagination. Isn't that amazing? Now, sometimes to be honest, I have walked out of a grocery store and my imagination thought that my car was way over here and it turned out to be somewhere else. Interestingly enough, I went in the direction of my imagination. It's true, isn't it? You will go in the direction of your imagination. And your imagination sometimes will eventually lead you where you want to be. Now, one of the things we heard this morning is the wonderful power of grace. And the wonderful power of grace is not everything that I have imagined has shown up in my life. Thank you, God. Can I hear an amen? So it's important to recognize that it's not just that what we imagine that shows up in our lives, but it is what we imagine and what we hold to. Thoughts held in mind produce after their kind is one of the ways we say it in Unity. When you hold to an energy, when you hold to a thought, when you hold to a vibration, you will draw more of that kind of energy and vibration into your experiences. Now, it may or may not look exactly as you imagined it, but I can tell you it'll have the same kind of energy. Do you follow what I'm saying? And so a huge piece of our work is, and this is not just positive thinking, folks. Let me just clarify something. It was a wonderful thing in our class this last week. It's interesting. I love how synchronous the universe is, because our lesson in our Absolute Abundance class was on visioning this week, which isn't that, I love coincidences, don't you? My definition of a coincidence is God wishing to remain anonymous. Well, so part of our work this week was on visioning, and there was a wonderful quote from one of the, and it actually didn't attribute the actual Unity teacher, but one of the Unity teachers at the ministerial school that Ken Nagel had, and actually David was in that class as well, and actually was helped participate in some of the early classes of the Abundance class. But one of the things he said is if you take, no matter if you vote your positive visioning or your positive affirmations, if you are doing positive visioning and positive affirmations and you're not also doing what he called the shadow work. And the shadow work is basically, in Unity, what we call working with denials. Now, that term denial really doesn't fit as well as it used to back when Charles and Myrtle were writing about it. It really is more about a releasing process. And Charles was very big on the releasing process and said that, if you're not doing your releasing work, then the quote from the guy at the school, the teacher at the school said, focusing on the positive, having positive imaging and focusing on that without also doing the shadow work is kind of like taking icing and putting it on stale old bread and calling it cake. So the reality is you want to not only envision what you want to experience in the positive, but you also want to envision yourself being free of those things that block or limit or hold you back or that are inducing of catabolic energy, which is energy that is life depleting. And you want to imagine and visualize and see yourself filled with the energy of life, the energy of love, the energy of peace, the energy of joy. And sometimes it needs to start simply with an energy of appreciating right where you are, appreciating what is, appreciating the value and the good that you do see and experience, and feeling that energy and helping it to move you into the next level of energy of light and peace and possibility in your life. So there are three aspects of imagination we talked about. One is the idea of conception, of conceiving. The other is visioning. We've just talked about that. Holding that image, holding that vision. Albert Einstein says imagination is more important than knowledge. Imagination is more important than knowledge. And so, in a metaphysical understanding, creation occurs by the union of our head and our heart. One of the works that we were doing in the abundance class is, how many of you here have ever done a treasure map? A few of you, huh? The treasure map's a wonderful opportunity, and I actually prefer the idea of an I am map. An I am map is really a way of helping to form a vision of the kind of person that you are growing into and you want to grow into. And it helps you to really see yourself more from that perspective in that way. And when you do that, your mind begins to go to work to create that. And so when we work with the visioning power of imagination is our capacity to dream what has not yet manifested. And so we envision and see ourselves as we desire to be and as Spirit is moving us and helping us to experience an unfoldment of that. And then the last part of visioning, really one of the significant things, is embodiment. Charles Fillmore said in the 12 Powers that when the faculties of the mind are understood in their threefold relations, spirit, soul, and body, it would be found that every form and shape originated in the imagination. It is through the imagination that the formless takes form. It is well known that the artist sees in mind every picture that he puts on canvas. Man and the universe are a series of pictures in the mind of being. Do you realize that? God is imagining you right now. Imagine that. The divine is imagining you and is imagining through you, and it's imagining our life and our world through you. And we are in the process of participating in that, and our work really is to open ourselves up to allowing even more of that light and that spirit. I believe that Jesus did this. I believe he's used not only his imagination to help transform the lives of those that he helped in terms of healing, but I think he also helped to bring himself into a manifestation more of his divine nature by acknowledging, I am the light of the world, by seeing himself from that place, by seeing himself as one with that which is the essence, the source of who and what you and I are. My question for each of us today is, do we have that kind of imagination? Are we willing to allow ourselves to be that light, to step into that knowing of the possibilities of us being the one that can make a difference in the lives not only of ourselves, but those in our world? Perhaps you think it's a big step, but that's only your imagination, isn't it? What if your imagination said, of course, that's natural. That's who and what I truly am. What if you envision yourself in that way? What if you see yourself in those possibilities? I think by doing that, we can truly not only transform our lives, but we become a part of the transformation of our world. Some years ago, there was a number of very popular books out called the worst case scenario books. You know, the whole series of books on the worst case scenario. They're very popular. And I'm going to suggest to you a different way of working, a different idea. What if we actually spent our time and energy more focused on our best possible solution? So you find yourself confronted with a challenge. Instead of looking out and seeing, well, what's the worst that could happen? Why not ask the question, wow, what's the best that can come of this circumstance? What's the good that's coming out of this? What's the possibilities of light, of love, of joy, of abundance? And I can tell you, if you make that kind of shift, you'll begin to move in that direction. So that's your homework for this week, and the next week, and the next week, and the next week. Probably the rest of our lives. It's an ongoing process of reminding ourselves that we are created as divine creators in spirit. We are spiritual beings having a human experience, and we're here to manifest and be that light of the world. So I invite you to accept that invitation. It's you. It is the truth of who and what you are. And you have amazing, unique ways of expressing your imagination in life and world. Let's move into our meditation time. And so we move into that comfortable place of stillness, of silence, of peace. Breathing in, we breathe into an energy, a consciousness of the peace that passes all understanding, of that Christ within. Just let yourself be open and receptive to feeling that in your heart, because we know that it's in a place of peace that we're most open and receptive to knowing and feeling and experiencing that connection we have with our source, with the Spirit of the divine, with God within. And as you breathe in and out, I invite you to breathe into the center of your brain. I just see myself now breathing into the center between my ears and my eyes. Let my words resonate in your heart. And just know I flood my brain with the light color of the midday cloudless sky. The palette of spiritual imagination. And every breath I take and every breath I release leaves me floating in the open sky of infinite possibilities. Nothing can weigh me down. Nothing can inhibit the free expression of my divine imagination. Soaring in infinite space, all things are possible. Divine imagination is a spiritual name, is our spiritual name and our true nature. And just know, I am a creator by divine design. I reach beyond assumptions and limitations and dreaming of magnificent possibilities. And by the power of conception, I catch a marvelous idea of what I can be and what I can do and what I can experience. And I can tell this idea is mine to express by its captivating appeal. I recognize in this idea the possibility of fulfillment that I've longed for. I feel it. I'm open to knowing it is so. The marvelous idea I have grasped fleshes out a vision and a purpose, like a seed planted in the ground and watered. This idea is nurtured by my power of vision. I envision the fully formed blossom of this idea now, while the seed still remains in the deep womb of possibilities. I am the spiritual power of imagination, claiming my divine identity. And I call forth from within me my rightful divine capacities, pouring them out in fulfillment of my purpose. I have eyes to see the good within me. I have eyes to see the good around me. I have eyes to see the good path ahead of me. And whatever seems impossible, by my power of imagination, I now declare all things are possible with God. Take now a nice deep breath. Breathing into that heart space, trusting and knowing that this is already knocking at the door of your consciousness and unfolding in the energy and the consciousness of your heart and mind. And it already is in the process of unfolding in and through you this day. Take a nice deep breath. Release it. Take another nice deep breath and gently allow yourself to become back in this room, in this time and place. And take one more nice deep breath and gently open your eyes and give thanks for the power of imagination. Imagination. And so it is.